So good morning, everyone. This is Ethan from SAPAC Light, and it's a pleasure for us to have Dr. Budgell, the president of the Global Peace Network, with us today to share his precious experience on leadership and mentorship. How are you doing, Dr. Budgell?
Very well. Thank you for having me today.
Let's start with a little bit introduce about yourself and the highlight of your career.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if my career has highlights, but my academic career started at York University, where I studied biology. I did my bachelor's and master's degree there. And of course, when I graduated with a master's degree in biology, I was completely unemployable in Canada. But during the course of my university days, had been studying martial arts. So I took myself off to Japan for a couple of years and studied there. And that, of course, was a very interesting experience. But then after 2.5 years, came back to Canada, enrolled in chiropractic college here, graduated, and had my own clinic for about 6 years in Toronto. And then, through a stroke of luck, an opportunity came up to return to Japan and to perform research that I was very interested in with a particular scientist there. So I went back to Japan thinking that I would be there for 1 or 2 years, and that turned into 14 years of some very interesting research. So that was a wonderful time in my life. Then returned to Canada. I guess it would be a little more than 12 years ago now, at which time my son, who had started our NGO, was having a family of his own and becoming busy with his own career. And so little by little, he more or less transitioned out of a leadership role in the NGO, and I took a stronger role. And that pretty much brings us up to where we are today.
So talking about the NGO, the Global Peace Network, if you would ask to bring up one of the most memorable projects that you lead, which one would it be?
I can't do that because everything that we do in Africa is memorable because it's so challenging and at the same time so rewarding. And also I'd say that the nature of NGOs in Africa is that they don't really engage in projects so much. And I think of a project as being something which has a distinct start and a finish. Rather, they tend to engage in programs. So one activity evolves into another, and hopefully you grow and improve as you move along. But to try and draw a project lesson out of all of that, something that we have learned is to evolve with the local situation. And there's a very concrete example of what I mean by that. When my son started there, which would have been in 2004, 2005, it really was the height of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And it was a catastrophe for Africa, as a consequence of which there were so many children who had lost their families or who had been abandoned. And so the challenge of caring for street children was an enormous challenge. And that's what my son took on originally. So he and a few of his friends who he gathered together essentially became what you might call an orphanage without walls, caring for these children. But over, well, now I guess 15 or 16 years since then, things have changed substantially. And very happily, while we still have HIV/AIDS, it is not the catastrophic disease that it once was. It is now a manageable challenge. There are more families intact caring for children. Social systems have improved substantially. And so there's not the need for the focus on street children that there once was. And so through the course of time, we have evolved away from that and more towards providing direct healthcare and also education to healthcare providers in Africa. So that's the project lesson, to evolve with the situation on the ground. I'd also say that when we first went into Tanzania, it was almost as a substitute for the government, which is a very unwise thing to try to do. And now everything that we do is in cooperation with local governments. So we work to strengthen local institutions rather than to compete with them or to replace them.
So rather than compete with them, is there any challenge or difficulties we're facing when initiating formal collaboration with the local government or other NGO bodies?
there are always challenges all the time, as you would have if you were trying to strike up an arrangement with a local government in Canada. But that, of course, we were moving into an environment which was literally foreign to us, so we didn't understand as well as we ought to have the history of the country and the culture of the country. And so there's a process of learning those things. And also in any working relationship, even if it was a business relationship here in Canada, there must be an element of friendship and trust in order to sustain the working relationship. And so a lot of effort needs to go into and has gone into getting to know people and building those friendships and building a trusting relationship.
So if we gonna expand the relationship topic a little bit, as the president of your organization, considering your leadership style, how do you define leadership?
Okay, well, as you perhaps understand, I'm not a big fan of leadership. I think if we look around the world today, we can see lots of examples where leaders and leadership have not worked in the public good. But happily within an NGO, within a philanthropic organization, everybody is there pretty much to serve the same purpose. And so you may not need a classical form of leadership in the way that you might, for example, within a corporation or within a local government. And therefore, much of what we do is done as a cooperative, not with one person or a small group of people leading, as it were.
So I'm assuming you and your team members are mostly highly self-motivated, considering working in a non-for-profit organization. So is there any, say, challenge or difficulties that you might have to encourage or motivate your team members in a different way?
Mostly not. One of the great things about working in an NGO is that, of course, people arrive self-motivated. They come to join you because your organization is the instrument through which they can fulfill their philanthropic aspirations. So it's a wonderful experience to work with a group of people like that. And of course, being an all-volunteer organization, there is no competition for financial rewards or for promotion, for that sort of thing. Having said that, I would caution that different people have different understandings of what it means to volunteer. And so if one does not think about this very deeply, they may come to an NGO with the image of volunteering being, as an example, spending a day at the beach picking up garbage. And while that's a very worthwhile activity, it's not the kind of commitment that NGOs require. We tend to be looking at months or years of work before we achieve our goals. So we require people who are quite dedicated and people who can persevere when there are challenges.
So I noticed that you and your team have achieved 750,000 foundation grant. That's a really great achievement, considering for an NGO party. So how do you set goals and lead your team to achieve that?
Yes, okay. Well, I think any NGO would say that the two challenges which they face all the time are money and human resources. You can't do anything without those two things. If we just focus on the money aspect, I can parse that into two different challenges. And the one which keeps us awake at night is the challenge not of getting money, but spending it responsibly. Because we always have this awareness that we're working with other people's money and that they have entrusted it to us in order to fulfill certain philanthropic aspirations that they have. So that's a very heavy responsibility, and we take that very seriously. Getting the money is surprisingly less of a challenge. I think a lot of NGOs would say this, and it is because happily we live in a world where probably 99% of people want to give. If they have the opportunity, they will do something to help other people. The challenge for most people is that they don't have that opportunity. The instrument to express their philanthropic nature isn't present. So NGOs provide that for people. Now, within that context, we have been particularly lucky because over the years, most of our money has come from a single foundation. And this is a very well organized foundation which operates in a corporate fashion, and I mean that in the best sense. That is to say that they are terribly well organized, they have their procedures in place, and so dealing with them is very straightforward. They have their requirements set out, you fulfill their requirements, and they support you. And happily, another aspect of that organization is that the managers that we deal with have direct experience on the ground in Africa. And so there's a lot of stuff that we don't have to explain to them that we might have to explain to people who were a bit more naive. And so invariably, activities that we are working on go off the track. There's not enough rain, or there's too much rain, or local regulations change, and so you have to adapt to these things. And dealing with our funding managers, we don't need to explain that these things happen. They understand that, and not only are they sympathetic, but they can offer advice on how to overcome challenges when we meet them. So they're really partners in this enterprise that we are engaged in. So that makes our life a lot easier. And there's something else that I do want to mention about this particular organization, which sets them apart from many, and that is that they insist on remaining absolutely anonymous. They will not have their name attached to any of the good that they do. And that, to me, is a very admirable quality.
That's really good to learn. So let's move backward a little bit of your timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any mentors that supporting and helping you through your career development?
I have been blessed with a number of mentors. But as you understand, the way in which the term is used today is a little bit different from when I was a younger person, where most people had never heard of the term, and most people never had the benefit of that kind of relationship in their lifetimes. When I was younger, we would think of it as an older, wiser, very kind person who, for whatever reason, saw some promise in a young person and decided that they were going to invest in nurturing that young person. I think these days the term is more often used with reference to someone who is certainly senior to oneself, certainly has a bit more experience, but perhaps it's a bit more of a constructed relationship these days than the rather lucky relationship that I fell into with a couple of mentors when I was a younger person.
So do you have any advice for new grads or young professionals if they want to seek mentorship or if they want to find a mentor for themselves?
Okay, we started off this conversation talking a little bit about my martial arts experience, and you know, there's a silly saying in the martial arts that when the student is ready, the master will appear, and I think traditionally that has also been the case with mentors and their students, that a person has to be sufficiently developed to benefit from a relationship with a mentor, otherwise the effort's wasted on both sides. And for me, it was always just something lucky that I fell into, so I'm not sure if in fact you can deliberately set out to construct that relationship. I don't want to discourage young people from trying to do that. I'm just not sure if that is the successful way to do that sort of thing. Having said that, the older I get, the more I understand that we are social animals, and that relationships with people around us are very important to our personal success and also to the success of civil society. So if there's an opportunity to develop a supporting relationship with someone, then certainly seize that opportunity. Someone had said that you should learn from the mistakes of others so that you can make your own mistakes. I think what they meant to say was so that you don't repeat mistakes, but you get the meaning.
Okay, so I agree with you that sometimes we have to wait for the opportunities to come, but also sometimes we have to adaptable and also be adjustable to the surrounding environments. Considering this pandemic, do you have any chance to transform your crisis into other new opportunities, especially for the Global Peace Network?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. And of course, it is a bit of a cliche that challenges are also opportunities. And while acknowledging that the COVID pandemic has been a tragedy for the world, in some ways it has been a wonderful opportunity for many NGOs, and it turned out to be something of a good opportunity for our NGO as well. And to put some details to that, prior to the pandemic, our focus had been on placing international volunteers in East Africa so that they would be working side by side with local clinicians in remote clinics. And that was quite successful. But even before COVID arrived, we had begun to develop an online learning system to supplement the face-to-face learning. And as it turned out, that was becoming quite well developed just as COVID appeared, and we were obliged to bring our volunteers home from Africa. And also, almost exactly at that moment, we had initiated a peer-to-peer mentoring system whereby clinical experts from Canada would meet on Zoom every week with clinicians in Africa, and together they would try and solve challenging cases. And so, whereas had those things not been in place, removing our volunteers would have left quite a void, it turns out that those other activities in fact compensated very well for withdrawing the volunteers, and in fact they have blossomed beyond our expectations. So while we put the online learning and the peer mentoring in place, particularly for the groups that we were working with already, those activities attracted the attention of others, and so we have now recruited far more local people than we had ever anticipated. And of course, the outcome of that is that many people are now receiving better care.
That's really good to know. So you mentioned before the pandemic, we actually have volunteers and clinicians in Tanzania. So were there any challenge or difficulties for frontline healthcare workers to meet in East Africa, and how do you lead to the positive outcome?
Yeah, challenges every minute of every day. You cannot imagine if you have not been there, but the government of Tanzania themselves will tell you that probably half of the positions that are available in the healthcare system are vacant because they simply don't have the trained personnel available to take on those positions. So there's a huge human resource challenge. The physical facilities are certainly never great and sometimes are absolutely decrepit. People are laboring without the medical instruments and the drugs that they require to do their jobs. And so in the most challenging situations, local people are working very hard to do a good job, and it's inspirational to watch them. They work very hard, and they are our heroes. And then we take our mostly young people and we put them into that situation. So in the most challenging healthcare environment in the world, we drop young people often with very little life experience, and surprisingly there are very few disasters. They seem inevitably to rise to the occasion. I think the lesson being for them and for us that people who appear to be young and inexperienced and just beginning to acquire their professional knowledge, in fact are capable of much more than they had anticipated. And perhaps we need the challenge to bring out the best in us.
Before I let you go, I have a very last question for you. Do you have any advice for young kids, well, I would say young professionals and the new grads who, well, regarding their career advancement and the leadership development?
Yes. To build on what we have just talked about, I suppose I can give two pieces of advice. And they would be, number one, plan, And number two, don't plan too much. And as an example of the latter, my own son was a very naive young student when he first went to Africa on a student experience, and made a great many mistakes along the way. And as he was sort of phasing out so that he could look after my grandchildren, and I was phasing into more of a guiding role, and as we would talk, he would sometimes mention how he had not planned sufficiently and how he had made certain mistakes, and foolishly would say how much he admired the degree to which I planned things and did my research ahead of time. And as I said to him, I am not the model to begin an NGO. That, in fact, if like an older person you spend too much time researching and planning and getting ready to do something, you're never going to do it. Sometimes the best planning is doing. I think Amelia Earhart said that. And so that relative naivety that a young person has mixed with the courage that young people have is just what you need to get things off the ground. And so if there are young people who are hesitating to jump into something that is challenging, I would say have more confidence in yourself. That the skills and the knowledge that you have are better than you understand them to be, and that you can achieve things which you didn't think you could achieve. So yeah, challenge yourself and do it.
Well, thank you for such useful advice. I will definitely carry on myself. And thank you again for fitting this useful and incredible interview with us within your busy schedule. And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you later.